It is 5:26. We have a quorum, and this meeting has been duly posted. Good evening and welcome to the called board meeting, a meeting of the Dallas Independent School District Board of Trustees. Please stand and join us for a moment of silence. Remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and salute to the Texas flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Trustees present, starting on your left and my right, are Trustee Flores, Trustee Mitchkay, Trustee Garcia, Trustee Marshall. Our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Michael Hinojosa, joins us, and I'm Justin Henry, Board President. Trustee Foreman is now walking in the room as well.
Si hay alguien que necesita los servicios de un intérprete, aquí la señorita les puede ayudar con el equipo. Gracias.
Okay, our agenda now calls for the public forum segment of our meeting. However, I was informed no one was signed up to speak. We're going to begin with our first action item. Consider and take possible action to approve the resolution to negotiate the purchase of property located at 3102 West Wheatland Road, Dallas, Texas, for a school bus depot and service center as described in the board resolution, not to exceed $820,000 plus title and closing costs, 2018 bond acquisition. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
It has been moved and seconded. Trustees, is there discussion? Trustees, please cast your vote by a show of hands, and please keep your hands up long enough for our accurate account. All in favor?
The motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Now moving on to agenda item B, consider and take possible action to approve the resolution to negotiate the purchase of property located at 3155 West Wheatland Road, Dallas, Texas, for a school bus depot and service center as described in the board resolution, not to exceed $7.5 million plus title and closing costs, 2018 bond acquisition. Do I have a motion?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Trustees, is there any discussion? Okay, trustees, please cast your votes by a show of hands, and please keep your hands up long enough for an accurate count. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
The motion passes 6-0.
Moving on to the next item, consider and take possible action to authorize the purchase of goods and services on an emergency basis pursuant to Texas Education Code Section 44.031H, effective immediately due to the need to replace or repair equipment or school facilities damaged by the October 20th, 2019 tornado and aftermath, and pass a resolution of emergency purchases declaration, emergency basis general operating special revenue bond funds. Trustees, before we take action on this item, Chief Lane has a PowerPoint he would like to show.
Mr. President and members of the board, I'd like to kind of lay the groundwork for this. First of all, I appreciate all of you taking my call and then calls from the senior staff when we had this pressing emergency. As you see the screen, you see kind of the sequence of events that occurred that evening. Most of us were watching the Cowboy game, and then around, as you can tell by what's on the screen, about 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, then we had obviously the tornado that was impacting our community. I am extremely proud of our maintenance department and our other operations departments, because almost immediately they sprung into action, and immediately then I started getting a few phone calls. Since it was dark, it was very difficult to determine, although Mr. Bates was inside the buildings kind of assessing the damage immediately thereafter. Then Chief Elizalde called me that evening, and then we knew we had some significant damage. And then the next morning, we had a senior staff meeting scheduled, as you see on the chart, at 8:37, that we had already scheduled and that includes my senior staff, the chiefs, and also a principal and a principal supervisor and executive director. And so I had the opportunity then, since I had a police vehicle, to drive the site. And immediately I knew that there were going to be some significant issues. The team met. We talked about a lot of considerations at 8:37, because that's when our staff meetings start. Everybody shows up at 8:30 because if you're early, you're late. But by 8:37, we were discussing. We pivoted. We looked at several options, but then we realized we needed to do more due diligence. So almost immediately, we adjourned the meeting around 9:30 or 10, and then all the chiefs went and did their due diligence. And we came back at 1 o'clock and 1:07 at Command Central. At that meeting, we had the police department, we had almost all the operations departments there, we had school leadership, we had communications, we had all of the senior team there, and we decided that we needed to make decisions immediately. And we did, and this is an emergency, this is a crisis. And so then once we made the decision, as soon as I started communicating with you, then we started communicating with the principals about our decision, and we made the decision because we had enough information that although it was going to be difficult, we could have school on Wednesday. And so now I'll turn it over to Chief Lane and Chief Elizalde to kind of pick it up from here and just kind of carry us through this, and then we'll be ready to respond to your questions. And then ultimately, we need some action to ratify some of the things and to approve some of the things that we need going forward. Chief Lane, why don't you pick it up from here?
Okay, I'm going to defer to Chief Elizalde. She has the first portion, and I have the second.
Good evening. So part of our task was to quickly assess where we could immediately have school as normal as possible, as quickly as possible. So this next slide gives you a visual of where most of the schools that were impacted either directly or indirectly due to power outages. So when we started to make decisions, the first decision needed to include just visually where were the issues we were dealing with. In a table format, what you see is on Monday, we had 21 schools that we were not able to have school that particular day. Please keep in mind that on this Monday, Richardson ISD closed the entire school district. So of our 222 schools, 201 continued as normal as possible, given the recent events. 21, however, and it was broken down by those that just had power outages to those that had significant damage and power outages, and those that had power outages and had extensive damage. On Tuesday, many of those without power came back online. We were able to then restore school to an additional 9 areas, so we only had 12 schools on Tuesday. Please keep in mind that the team at this time is working, because we've already decided Monday that we're having school on Wednesday to the 3 sites that we knew were directly devastated by this tornado. So Cary Middle School, Jefferson High School, and Walnut Hill Elementary School, behind the scenes all Monday and all of Tuesday, we are focused on ensuring we have locations. In addition to the fact that Burnett and Cigarroa, while the buildings were damaged, we're going to be able to house students, but not immediately, because we still didn't have power at those locations. By Wednesday, we now only had 7 locations where we couldn't have school. So I'd like to go by Thursday, every single group of students, not necessarily at their...
Let me interrupt you at that point. So on Monday and Tuesday, we had total control of those opportunities for remedy and success. By Wednesday, it was out of our control because Encore was struggling still to get a lot of the community up, not just us. So I want to thank publicly T.C. Broadnax, because I called him and I asked him to connect me to some senior people at Encore. And then once I had that conversation, then they did tell me that they had moved these schools up to in the top priority to help us with that. And so I do want to thank Encore and Andrea Sanders, who was very responsive when we got to things that were outside of our control. So Chief, pick it back up.
So keeping that in mind, I'd like to kind of revisit what that actually looked like for students and teachers and staff members and community. So we had some temporary school relocations. So Burnett, let me say it correctly, Burnett, Cigarroa, and Pershing. Those elementary schools reported, and we picked up students from those neighborhood communities and transported them to Lowe's Fieldhouse. So Lowe's Fieldhouse, I know it's kind of difficult to imagine. You think about graduations that we hold there. We had school. Our executive director, two executive directors, Rashonda Clayton Brown and Angie Torres, are going to have school. Whether it's under a tree or in a big complex, they're going to ensure that the principals have the support they need. And sure enough, we had school, as you can see from a couple of pictures. So those are what we call temporary, because by the time power was restored, and as I'm sitting here with you this evening, Burnett, Cigarroa, and Pershing were back in their buildings Monday. Pershing would have been back in their buildings sooner. That was the last school that we were able to get online with power. So that's why we delayed Pershing. Then we have, so those are temporary, those individuals, those are now holding school back at their original sites. I certainly will allow Deputy Superintendent Lane to speak to Burnett and Cigarroa, because they did sustain some damage, but we're able to hold school there. Semi-permanent relocation, meaning long-term. These are sites that are not going to be just for a couple of weeks. At a minimum, we know we're talking about the rest of the year for sure, and how much more of the next school year we'll certainly
And
hear.
let me interrupt you again, Chief, because let me tell you, I toured the schools on Tuesday and then again on Wednesday. I knew Tuesday we had an opportunity for success because the attitude that the teachers had and the maintenance department and the food service department was so positive that they were going to move mountains to make this happen. And I mean, so it was just amazing to watch that. And it would have made every one of you proud to watch these people in action as we get to Wednesday. So pick it back up.
So school relocation then on Wednesday. This is illustrating two of our campuses that will be at semi-permanent locations, meaning for the minimum of the rest of the school year. Thomas Jefferson High School will be located at Edison Learning Center, and Walnut Hill Elementary School is temporarily relocated to Tom Field Elementary School. These students attended classes on Wednesday, and we had school at these locations on Wednesdays, thanks to the behind-the-scenes people, of course, in maintenance, operations, transportation, support staff, and of course, the staff at the campuses, the teachers, the support staff, the principal, and the community, the parents who trust us to continue to send their children even to a different location. So the number of, when I left on Wednesday from TJ at Thomas Edison, the number of boxes, anonymous donations that were coming in from, they were using Amazon Prime to deliver things overnight. Some told us, some of them had return addresses on them. Most of them did not, just people donating. I think it would have made everyone, if you could have been there, it just, the feeling of the outreach of support from strangers, knowing that our kids needed supplies. So with each of those, just wanted to give you a visual. How far is Tom Field from Walnut Hill? It's 4.8 miles. Our biggest challenges are going to be, of course, transportation, and I don't know how, but they created those routes and got our kids there. We had brand new desks that maintenance and operations got delivered. Teachers were having to put them together on Tuesday to receive the kids, but maintenance and operations got them brand new desks that had just been received, so that students felt welcomed. Food services. Michael Rosenberger and his team I don't know how they did it either, but everybody, this was truly a team effort where every single member of the team did their part, and this is what happens when everybody does their part. Jefferson is the one that, of course, is probably the furthest, but we still want to look at our glasses half full. At least we had a facility that most districts would not have had because we had been utilizing Edison. We did have to relocate everything from our ACE support staff to Sherry's Junior Academy group to extracurricular activities to student records. And again, the extra effort put forth by people to come help us move student records and so on to Nolan Estes so that we could get TJ every single space at Thomas Edison. It is 9.2 miles. It was amazing to see the kids be welcomed by the teachers. I have to take a point of privilege to say it is amazing to watch teachers and staff who know their students because they call them by name, they talk to them in a way that reassures them that they're very important. And that doesn't happen in every single school district, but it happens in ours. And it was truly amazing to see the teachers and how they interacted with students. Probably the one that is the most difficult, and yet somehow also because of the support of the community and the kids and how our students responded to receiving kids from another school would be Cary Middle School. We don't and didn't have a facility where we could relocate. If we started breaking them up by grades, I would have been breaking them up. I would have been breaking up families. I would have had a sibling over here versus another one over here. So we got with Velia Lara. I asked her what made sense, and we basically geographically split the school with 290 students going to Franklin and about 304 going to Medrano Middle School. There was a picture of a student at Franklin that said, "Together we are better." Then I walked into the classrooms and the kids were talking about they needed a new mascot. They wanted to combine the Colts and the Falcons and call them the Colkins. So, I mean, it's kids who come up with, it was truly amazing. And I hope parents and guardians that may be listening to this, I also know it's a reflection of their family and their values as well as part of the school. And Medrano was another school that was just accepting our students completely. So it was a team effort. We know that, and now what happened, some people say, what happened with athletics? So we've got 2 teams now at Franklin and 2 teams at Medrano and more kids in the band and more kids in the UIL. Rather than not allowing them to participate again, they were just embraced. And so everything has continued on Monday. If no one knew and went to Franklin or went to Medrano, you would think those kids have been there all year long. And that's a testimony to all of our communities and to our schools. And so we thank you for your support and allowing us to do our job. I'll turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Scott Lane.
Thank you, Chief Elizalde. We've gotten so many emails from folks that want to help us, companies, vendors, community people, everyone. And I was telling Dr. Hinojosa the other day, one of the best things I read was how this process works. And what Chief Elizalde just presented is what I would call the sprint, because we had to get the kids back and everything moves so fast. But now the next part is the building recovery, and that's more of a marathon. That's going to take some time to rebuild these schools, but we are moving forward. So I summarized here, there were 21 campuses, 1 district facility that were either damaged or without power, and then I've broken it down into 16 campuses had minor, 3 had moderate, and then 3 of them were either major or significant. The minor, what we call the minor damage, for the most part, it was just the power failures at the schools. But we did suffer, there was debris on the yards and tree limbs were down. So we did have some damage. And I do want to say that even as insignificant as that is to the big picture, that is all covered in the claim with the insurance company. So we've been very careful to log all of our hours and workload and anything we had to purchase to include as part of the claim. The middle, what we call the moderate, there were 3 campuses that were impacted. You can see Burnett, I almost said Burnett, Burnett was hit where the gymnasium was severely damaged. The roof was taken off, and of course we lost the gym floor when the roof went off. We've cleared the debris, and we've stabilized the campus by building a temporary wall to not allow kids and staff to enter the gymnasium. So the campus is secure, but that work will be a part of the claim and is a driving factor for the emergency waiver tonight, so we can move as quickly as possible to get this repaired. And then Figueroa, actually, the air conditioning units that were on the roof were completely blown off, and for a temporary measure, we are putting spot coolers up there. Now, spot coolers do not provide air conditioning. What they provide is a dehumidification of the space, but they do provide heat. And we're in that time of the year where heating is needed, so we will move as quickly as possible to replace those rooftop units for Figueroa. And then the North Dallas Bus Barn, one of our recent purchases, I guess, they suffered a power failure to the fuel pumps on that Sunday night, and we were able to get an emergency generator there, get the pumps going so we could have the buses running Monday morning, but that has been repaired, and we do have the permanent fix for power at North Dallas. Then we get down to the 3 schools that were obviously the most heavily damaged. If you look at this, I listed the damages on the left, and I said visible because when this was done, we were unable to get inside the buildings. So these were basically what we saw just from a drive around of the campuses. There's much, much more damage inside the campuses that will be discovered over the next week or 2. And then I've outlined also the process and the next steps of what we will do. We do have a police watch at the campus. The insurance adjusters are working. We couldn't even get into the buildings until we did a asbestos inspection to make sure everything was safe. The city of Dallas, the fire department, everyone was involved to ensure that no one went into those buildings unless it was completely safe. We have fenced the campuses. TJ has, we did tarp the roof to prevent additional water from coming in there. And then the next steps, we're working towards getting the debris cleaned up. We're boarding up the windows and doing everything we can. And I'll kind of summarize this at the end. Cary Middle School, you can see the damages. All the portables are gone. We had I don't know if you saw the picture of our police car that moved about 100 feet. We're not sure how that happened, but actually it got picked up and moved to a different location. 90% of the windows are gone, portions of the roof, so there is significant damage at Cary Middle School. And then finally, Walnut Hill. Again, all the portables are gone, trees are damaged, a lot of roof damage, 80% of the windows are gone. The chiller is totally ruined, the cooling tower is gone. I mean, just very, very significant damage to these schools. So to give you a summary of where we're at and kind of what we've been through, we're insured through a third-party insurance company called Zurich, and they have an adjuster on site. But the school district also has an additional adjuster that we contract with. So you have an adjuster for the insurance company, you have an adjuster for the school district. So they are working hand in hand to evaluate the cost of the damages. Our insurance policy is actually covers up to $500 million per occurrence, and there is a $2 million deductible. That will be a part of that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, before we could even get into the buildings, we had to do the asbestos inspection, and then they also had to do a structural assessment to determine just if people could even get in the building. We have gotten to that point, and we can allow some people into the building, so our next steps are to box up and remove the contents, which will take place this week. We have plans at the end of the week to allow teachers and everyone to come in and get all their things. The debris is being cleared up, It will be cleared out at these 3 schools from the lawns by late Friday or mid-Monday at the very latest. Fenced up, the windows are boarded up, and we do have 24-hour police security at all 3 campuses, and no one will get into those buildings unless they properly identify themselves as a Dallas ISD employee. So what's going on right now is another set of structural engineers are in the buildings to assess long-term damage, because that will be a part of the claim when the claim is filed. And in all probability, this is going to take a while. There's no doubt about it. We're not going to know next week. It's probably closer to Thanksgiving to where we have final numbers on the cost of the damages and where we move from that point forward. The other thing I'll mention is FEMA will be out tomorrow looking at all of our schools, because there is funding that can be provided by FEMA, and we will know more about that as we go along. I want to especially shout out risk management. They've done a great job trying to pull all this together with the adjusters under Chief Thompson. They have meetings every single day at 4 o'clock to go through where are we at in the next steps. And then finally, I put up a slide, said many thanks. There's so many people involved. The employees all over the district, not just the ones that were impacted by these schools, but so many people reached out to us, the community, the patrons, the vendors. It's just been amazing. And Chief Elizalde and her staff, I told Dr. Hinojosa when he called me and said, you did a good job, did a great job, your folks. I said, Doc, Stephanie and her folks told us where everyone was going. We just did what we had to do to make sure we could get those kids back in school. So Chief Elizalde, her executive directors, and Sherry Christian did a great job. And again, the business office and what they've done, Chief Thompson had fronted us money to get us going because we had to get some things done, and we needed money to get that done. And then finally, 38 bus routes created in a 24-hour period. That might be a world record, not sure. And then over 3,000 breakfasts and lunches relocated to alternate facilities within a 24-hour period. And last but not least, I want to thank David Bates. I mean, he was up from Sunday night probably till late Wednesday afternoon dealing with everything. And him and his folks just did a tremendous job. And with that, I know we've passed out some information, additional information, right? Oh, I thought I saw. There you go. So even though we're early on in the process, and I said this is a marathon, we're trying to get to the front of the line in the marathon by doing as much as we can ahead of time. So we have at TJ, we had an architect on site because that building is currently under construction. So I had them look at some various concepts that could be utilized at Thomas Jefferson. And then we also utilized a different architect to look at Walnut Hill. And we also have another architect that's currently looking at Cary Middle School on what can be done. So I don't have these slides contained within the PowerPoint, but it basically shows some various options on what could be done if we choose not to just rebuild Thomas Jefferson as a 9 through 12. There's options here for a 6-12 campus or even a K-12 campus with a complete separation of the elementary school, which would allow us to possibly utilize the Walnut Hill site for some other type program. And again, I've included that, possibly a career tech center could go there. I know we're early on in the process, and we're truly going to have to wait for the adjusters to do their due diligence to figure out what our next steps are. But I don't think it's too early to begin thinking about what we would like to do in the future to rebuild these 3 campuses. So with that, we'll be glad to entertain any questions.
So trustees, we'll have a few questions on the presentation, and then we'll move on to the motion. So Trustee Marshall.
I don't have any questions per se. I just want to tell you guys how proud I am. I mean, it's been a emotional week, I think, for a lot of us in North Dallas. And, you know, most of the damage, I think, was in my district and Trustee Flores' district. And, you know, Sunday night I was huddled in a closet with my kids, and the tornado hit about 200 yards from my house. And, you know, many of my neighbors have lost their homes. And the one, I think, factor that a lot of families count on for stability is having their kids in school. And the fact that we were able to move this quickly to get kids back in front of their teachers is remarkable. I mean, and, you know, I'm proud of the progress that this district has made over the last, 5 years, 10 years in improving student outcomes. And I think this administration and this board has acted to ensure that we're delivering the best education we can, and we've still got a long way to go. But we've made progress in lots of ways, but it's been slow. It's hard to move mountains in a short amount of time, and we've been moving mountains with educational outcomes, but it's taken years to do it. You guys just moved mountains in 24 hours, 48 hours in some cases, to recover from a tragedy. And I got to tell you, I mentioned this to Stephanie privately, when they told us on Monday that they were going to have kids in school on Wednesday, and I literally couldn't even get out of my neighborhood because there was trees blocking every street. I was like, I don't know how in the world you think you're going to have kids back to school on Wednesday. And the fact that that you guys pulled that off amazes me. It really does. So thank you guys. It's one of the proudest moments I've experienced as a trustee to witness what you guys have pulled off. It's also makes me very proud of our community that so many people have stepped forward. I think the Dallas Education Foundation has already raised almost $1.3 million. I think, I know I've been contacted by hundreds of people asking how they can help, and I'm sure my colleagues have been as well. So I really just wanted to say thank you and tell you how proud I am of my affiliation with the district, especially a district that can pull this off and act this quickly. The one last comment I will make is I love the fact that you're already thinking about how to redo TJ. There's an incredible principal there who has done great work over the last several years and turned that school into a shining example of what we can do with our students. But for anyone who's driven by TJ prior to this storm, the exterior facade of that building was not congruent with what was happening inside the building. The facade of TJ has not been impressive for a long time, and in an environment in North Dallas where you're surrounded by ISD and Hockaday and St. Mark's and Green Hill, curb appeal matters. And when we rebuild TJ, I hope we do it as a temple of education, and I hope it has that curb appeal that attracts families in that neighborhood. And I, for one, would love it if we would consider doing a pre-K through 12 school at that campus. So I'm thrilled that you're already starting to think about that. I hope that you'll involve this board in those conversations as you learn more about the condition of the building, because I think we've got an opportunity here to turn a tragedy into a really great opportunity for the kids at TJ. So thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.
All right, Trustee Flores and Foreman, then Mackey.
Thank you, President Henry. So I want to echo everything that Trustee Marshall just said. I mean, it's just unbelievable what our staff has been able to pull off. Dr. Hinojosa and your team, the teachers at the campuses, the principals at every campus, the families, as you say, who've stuck with us and have been able to be there. I also wanted to, these three campuses, they're basically gone, or in my political district, they're all our schools. But the outreach of support from city council members, from, our state rep, from all the different parts of the city that have reached out and said, how can we help? This is terrible, but maybe we can rebuild better, bigger, faster, to get those kids back into a campus and to have bold ideas. Thank you to Trustee Johnson for welcoming our kids at Edison. He was out there that morning visiting with our kids and welcoming them to West Dallas, and that was great. So just very grateful for all the different folks that are supporting us. Of course, we know that two of our great leaders here in Dallas, Mark Cuban and Jerry Jones and his family and their foundation are both supporting us greatly, and we're very grateful for that. And during the TJ homecoming game, Trustee Garcia was there coming to visit with our kids, and we were able to, and Trustee Marshall, and it was so great to have that outpouring of support. And I've been to a few TJ football games, and I've never seen the stands full for a football game. So it was really exciting, and I hope that same support continues long term. I am very excited about the possibilities, and thank you, Chief Lane, for jumping on this. And I think there's a lot of community support, and we'll have community meetings to get more support on ideas of what to do at this. Basically, I just see it as a greenfield space. It's basically, there's nothing there. Think big and think long term of what this facility could look like to welcome our students to a great new facility up there. And it's just amazing what support we've had from the community. So I want to say personally how grateful I am to every single person who's reached out to me and who is helping us through DEF and other ways. It really is heartwarming and amazing to have this level of support, and to be sitting here 10 days later knowing every single kid's been back in school for several days is just amazing. So thank you to everybody who's making that happen: transportation, food service, maintenance, everybody. So thank you.
So, just like everyone else, Dr. Hinojosa, you and your staff did a wonderful job in trying to ensure that all of the children that were affected based on the storm were back in school again. I mean, I've never seen anything turn around that fast. And I am grateful. It wasn't just one part of the city that hurt when we saw those children. It was the whole city. There was people from everywhere calling, trying to do whatever they could, be it large or small. So many people were trying to reach out and help. Even your staff not from that area, but staff from my area also came to try to help out and do what they could. And so I'm just real excited that you guys were able to ensure that they got back in school. But there are a couple of questions that I have. One is that I think it was 3 elementary schools at Lowe's. Are they back in their schools now?
Yes, ma'am. All 3 are back in their schools
Good.
currently, and
Good.
actually 2 of them were back in their school on Friday. Pershing was the only one that stayed at Lowe's for one more day. But as of Monday,
They're all back.
they're all back on
That
their
is-
campus.
that's
Yes,
great
ma'am.
news. So, and then the last question that I have is just on the emergency purchase declaration. Does that have a time frame, or is it in perpetuity?
If Dwayne and/or legal have an opinion, I just know we need to execute some things in the ratification.
And I want you to do that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I just need to have a clear understanding of what
And
I'm
hopefully he
voting
has an
on.
answer now,
And
but
Yeah.
Chief Thompson, before you begin, the motion is not on the table. We'll make the motion, and we'll have a question and answer period for that as well, but go ahead.
Can you please?
Oh, her first.
That declaration is just for emergency purposes, so it's very specific to the situation. And then the next board meeting, we would have ratification of any purchases.
So, I don't quite understand.
It's not in perpetuity, it's just for this specific purpose.
I know that, but is it for any length of time? Because you're not going to be able to come to one board meeting and bring forth everything that you need. I think it's going to be a series of things that you're
I
going to.
don't, in the resolution, I don't believe it has a specific date of an end date. It just relates to these particular incident that we're trying to deal with.
So will you be bringing that to us monthly, quarterly?
That depends on what we find out, but we will, anything that's directly related to this incident will be, we've been asked to even code in a certain way so that we can document any expenditure related to these items have to be coded in a specific way. And you're exactly right, some of those expenditures may not happen for a while, but everything
That's
needs
correct.
to be tightly coded to these projects, and that's why our team is very careful in getting all that organized at this point.
All right, thank you.
I just want to thank you all for the work that you've done. I've never seen anything like that. Chief Elizalde, Deputy Superintendent Lane, Dr. Hinojosa, to coordinate everything from buses, food services, custodial to technology, and everything else that I'm not mentioning. That is an enormous lift, and that doesn't go unnoticed by the entire community. I got the chance to visit New TJ in West Dallas on Thursday, so the second day that they were there. And it was incredible to see the kids were already there. It was before school started. Walked into the building, got to see Principal Massey in there and the teachers, and two instances really crystallized it for me. First of all, a teacher came in, collared shirt, tie, carrying a whole stack of cones that they had found and said, "We're going to use these, we know we need them." That dedication level from teachers at the school, from families, communities across the city is absolutely incredible. The second thing that really stuck with me is that kids already had routines. They were hanging outside in designated areas, throwing the football. It looked like a normal day of school on the second day. And that speaks to the leadership at y'all's level and everywhere else in the system, so thank you for that. I am excited about the fact that we're less than 10 days here and there is 3 different options, discussions are happening. That's incredible. I'm excited to see those conversations continue in the community, at this board table, and all the ideas that you all are going to bring to the table. So thank you all for your work. Thank you to the wider community and all the teachers, staff, and community members who stepped up.
Trustee Michka.
Well, I think everything has been said in terms of, how impressed and inspirational the work you all did in such a short period of time. But not everyone has said it, so I want to say it as well. It really was amazing and magnificent. I was inspired by the level of commitment that we saw, not only from our superintendent's leadership team, teachers and principal, and the community, but it was just absolutely amazing. And we talk about all the great achievements that the district has made in terms of student outcomes and about the increases in student opportunities that we've had, but to be able to do this in such a short period of time is just overwhelming. I received several calls from people who are on the TASB board asking, like everyone else, I must have gotten hundreds of calls from people, how can we help? But one of the persons I talked to who was on the TASB board said, well, 3,000 kids, that is bigger than 75% of the school districts in the entire state. And to basically be able to move what is essentially an entire school district in 1 or 2 days, just fantastic. I would like to ask one question about insurance. To what extent are we self-insured, and to what extent do we have insurance covering the bulk of this damage?
Well, all of the damage is covered in insurance, where our liability relates to the deductible. So all of our contents, and actually in this scenario, even the personal contents of our teachers are covered under the current policy we have through Zurich.
So if I can just take this to a hypothetical situation so you can answer the question. If we sustained $50 million at 3 schools combined, our maximum exposure is going to be $2 million or $6 million?
$2 million.
$2 million.
So actually, by building, it's 250,000 or 1% of the value, whichever is higher. So what we did up to the maximum of 2 million. So given the number of buildings, we just estimated that we'll hit the total outlay of 2 million. The coverage of the individual buildings are replacement costs plus a percentage for content up to the 500 million cumulative.
Okay, so just like in almost every insurance situation, we're not 100% covered, but we are essentially covered for the vast majority of the damage that we sustained.
That's correct.
Okay.
In addition, there are other entities that may even help offset the deductible. And there are federal entities and other entities that are now currently assessing that opportunity. So there's even a possibility that we'd be made whole on the deductible as well.
Okay, again, thank you for all the hard work and for making this happen. It has been a really unifying episode for the entire city and the district, and we're all very, very proud of the work you've done. Thank you.
Trustee Johnson.
Want to echo what everyone has said. Dr. Hinojosa, your staff did a remarkable job when it came to the kids over at TJ and Walnut and those kids that have experienced that kind of tragedy. This is what it looks like when we throw away politics and all come together for kids and make sure that everyone is taken care of. I got a call from Dr. Hinojosa about the use of Edison, and I was automatically saying, this is a done deal. I called Trustee Flores and I let him know that whatever he needed, we're going to be there for him because all our kids matter. And to see the just uniformity, to see everyone coming together. Chief Elizade was in heels, but she was running around, sprinting like she run a 4.2, trying to make things happen for everyone. The principal over at TJ, we're going to keep her in District 5. Because she
I'm
is.
still doing the graduation.
She was awesome. And to see so many community members from District 5, members from West Dallas 1, a whole bunch of people come together to make sure that everyone felt comfortable. It felt like family. It was remarkable to see everything that was going on, and we're here for each other. Echo what Trustee Marshall has said. This is what happens when we have great board and great leadership. When tragedy comes, we're hitting the ground, running all hands on deck, and anything that we can do in District 5 to continue to make sure that everyone at Thomas Jefferson is pleased and comfortable, we're going to continue to do that. Trustee Flores, we're here for you any way possible. And so thank you once again to the administration. You guys did a phenomenal job. We're praying for everyone. We're doing anything we can. Please let us know because we're here. Thank you so much.
Trustee Garcia.
I think for this and so many more reasons, I'm proud to be a Dallas ISD graduate, but I think even more so, extremely proud, orgullosa, absolutely, of DISD and the leadership across the board. But ultimately, to your point as well, I mean, just a beautiful showcase of coming together for all students, and just to hear your words, Trustee Mackey, and the experiences that we had with our families over the weekend at TJ and other schools. But I'm DISD proud. Thank you all.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what my colleague just said across the board, but I do want to give a personal public thank you to our superintendent, Dr. Hinojosa, Chief Elizalde, Chief Lane, the whole team. If you're on the team and you're in the room, if you could stand up for a moment just to be acknowledged. I know there's a lot of people that aren't in the room, but I really appreciate the effort that you all put to do something very remarkable in a very short time. So, I mean, I was amazed and inspired, and I was like Trustee Marshall, I didn't think it was possible, what you've accomplished in the last week. I was out of town for part of it at the Council for Great City Schools, and a lot of folks were talking about the progress, the DISD, and the things we're doing. And we had some folks up there presenting some of the great things we're doing in DISD. But while they're looking at that data and academic achievement, what they really need to know, the strength of DISD is truly our people. And it's not data, it's not dumb numbers, it's not metrics, it's really our people. The people that were there, our teachers, our staff, our janitors, our administrative staff, y'all really make this district move. And all the gains that we see are superficial in a sense because the people care about the people, and that's what's the most important part about this district. So I want to add one piece, and I have a retired teacher in our district, Dr. Lombardi, who was the principal of Skyline last year. She's retired, and she's put in her work for our kids in our community. She literally showed up at TJ as a former principal retired to help out. And it's just a testament of what we see from our educators and our community and our families really rallying around folks to make sure we deliver for our kids. It was kid-focused, and it was people driving it. So I'm just incredibly thankful to be a member of this board, to be affiliated with the DISD and the administrators. So I'm just incredibly thankful. And I think at this point, if there's no other comments, we're going to move on to the...
If you'll allow me to make one more statement.
ahead, Chief Elizondo.
Because I do expect a lot of our principals because our kids deserve it. So I'd like to actually call their names out if you'll allow me just for a moment. First, I would like to recognize all of the principals. As Trustee Foreman mentioned earlier, many of our principals left their schools to come make sure that the support was where principals needed it, whether it was at Edison or whether it was at Tom Field or whether it was at Franklin or whether it was at Medrano. But I would specifically like to, because we've mentioned some of their names, and I would like to just mention every one of them, if you will give me that privilege. Of course, I want to thank Sandy Massey at TJ, Philip Potter at Walnut Hill Elementary, Roger Ceballos at Franklin Middle School, Teresa Sergoodson at Medrano Middle School, of course, Naomi Salas, the principal of Cary, who is going back and forth between Medrano and Franklin to make sure her kids are great. And I mentioned Angie Torres and Rashonda Clayton Brown, and I certainly don't want to leave Melody Pascal out because she's been all over the place trying to make sure all her secondary schools. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, of course, Jolie Healy and Sherry Christian, because Sherry is truly a behind-the-scenes person, and somehow, no matter what I ask Sherry to do, she just says yes, and somehow it magically happens. So all of the principals provided support from around our district, which I want to say not only shows the support to the principals that had direct impact, but also says the health of our schools. Because as a principal, I cannot tell you that I was always comfortable leaving my campus. So the fact that our principals left their schools to come provide support says a lot about the district that you all serve and that you allow us to lead. And I also want to thank the superintendent for always empowering us to think through all our decisions before we actually sometimes just jump out there and say, this is what we're going to do. So I'd like to thank our superintendent as well for everything that he did to ensure that this went well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to reread the agenda item. Consider and take possible action to authorize the purchase of goods and services on an emergency basis pursuant to Texas Education Code Section 44.031H, effective immediately due to the need to replace or repair equipment or school facilities damaged by the October 20th, 2019 tornado and aftermath, and pass a resolution of emergency purchases declaration. Trustees, do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Second. It has been moved and seconded. Trustees, is there any discussion? Okay, trustees, please cast your votes by a show of hands, and please keep your hands up long enough for an accurate count. Please raise your hand if you're voting in favor.
The motion passes 8-0.
Thank you. The time is now 6:20, and this meeting is adjourned. We've already done a moment of silence to the previous meeting. Right now in the room, trustees present, starting on your left and my right, are Trustee Mackey, Trustee Flores, Trustee Mitch K, Trustee Garcia, and Trustee Marshall. Our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Hinojosa, joins us, and I'm Justin Henry, Board President. We're going to go ahead and begin. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Lynn Rossi Scott, and this is a continuation of the Board Superintendent Workshop. What I want to start with is the document that I passed out to you and kind of walk you through it. This is a draft. It is, there was a request for basically FAQs for a very, very short version of what's management, what's governance, what's oversight of management, what is micromanagement, those kinds of things, and what do you do when you get the calls. So what we have done is put together a document. I kind of want to walk through it just a little bit with you, let you know this is a draft. If you see that we are missing things, we will definitely put it in for you, because ultimately what this is designed to be is something that you can refer to when there are situations and you want to know where to go. So the very first part of this is basically an FAQ on board service and constituent services. What do you do when someone calls you about a student complaint? What do you do when someone calls you about an employee complaint or a facility complaint? And it gives you suggested responses of whether it's policies, referring people to specific individuals, contacting specific individuals. That's the first 2 pages. The next page, there was a request for discussion points, that you would like points that you could have a discussion with a constituent and say some of the things we've been talking about that, you know, for instance, as an individual trustee, you really don't have any power. It's when you act as a body corporate that you have power. And so the second page is those discussion points. The third, fourth, and fifth pages then, fourth, fifth, and sixth pages, I apologize, are board duties, because sometimes people want to know what you do. And so those are listed for you, your statutory duties and your board policy duties, so that you can tell people what is your responsibility, should that come up. The next page, page 7, I apologize, is more of a diagram that kind of shows you the same things that we've been talking about, but is more of a diagram form. And then the last 3 pages are basically putting down for you what is management, what is governance, and then what does oversight of management look like, which is your responsibility, and what does micromanagement look like, so that you can see some specific examples of that. What I would ask you to do, this has been through a number of us who have been looking at it, trying to make sure that we've covered everything that you need, but if we did not, then please let us know, and we will be happy to continue to work on this so that it can be something that is useful to you. That is the ultimate goal, is to have something for you that is useful to you. So I don't want to go into any more detail, I think, specifically on it tonight, but it does give a lot of good examples, I think, in the last 3 pages of, you know, what is micromanagement. Promising outcomes, directing staff to use certain vendors, directing staff to do specific things, changing plans and specifications, directing use of certain facilities, directing use of certain equipment in facilities, second-guessing the superintendent when he has the authority to do things. So, and it also gives then very specific examples of what is appropriate governance. Yes, sir.
So I just want to make sure I understand. That what you've just described, that's not something you're going to go over tonight? That's just a reference for us?
Yes, sir. This is your reference. I would like you to look at it and let me know if we've missed things. So this ultimately would be your reference to use as you deal with constituents.
Okay, so, Mr. President, what I'm going to suggest is that we do exactly what's been suggested, but also that at a board briefing, when we get this in final form after people have had a chance to make their suggestions, that we actually do it in the board briefing and go over those specific examples.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can take that under advisement. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so which of these should I be using? Sorry about that. All right, so are you ready to continue with the PowerPoint? Do you have any questions on this FAQ before we proceed? Kind of, we have a plan of action?
So this is a non-exhaustive list of how to micromanage. I'm saying how not to micromanage? Is
It's
that-
both, I hope.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank
It's we really tried to come up with enough examples so that you could understand what micromanagement is and you could understand what your governance role is. If we've missed some things, especially in the first part in the FAQs of how do you deal with situations and you need some better suggested responses, please let us know, because we do want to make this something that is useful for you. That is absolutely the ultimate goal. Okay? All right. Do you all have your notebooks yet? You do. Okay, so we're starting with slide 169. Board member Frank visits every campus, talks to teachers and custodians, learning about their concerns. When they voice concerns, he encourages them to file grievances, promising them a sympathetic ear at the board level. Obviously, that can lead to some very real concerns because while certainly you can promise that the board will look at something objectively, you cannot promise that the board is going to be sympathetic to a specific person. As a board, your responsibility is going to be to look at both sides, to look at the information that's presented to you, which is going to be both sides of the issue. There's always two sides to every story. And certainly, you can notify employees of the board policies if it's a employee concern. DGBA certainly can be used by employees when they have grievances. But what is, I think, very important is that if you do get involved in one inadvertently for one reason or another, then the best thing to do is recuse yourself when it gets to the board level. And you want to avoid that. You want to be able to sit as a board, as a body corporate, and make decisions. So you don't want to get yourself involved in grievances. But if you do inadvertently, then the best thing to do is recuse. Under your board operating procedures, when you recuse, you literally leave the room. You don't participate in discussion about it. You don't sit and listen to the presentations. You literally leave the room. And I think that is best, because then there isn't any question about are you trying to influence someone inappropriately in the process. So I think that your board operating procedures are really helpful to you in that they prevent those kinds of accusations from being made. From management perspective, they will address an employee's concerns through the grievance process or through informal processes. Always informal processes are better. And they can, if it's brought to the superintendent's attention, let the board know how things are resolved. Your management also would handle any grievances that come up. So you do have board dispute resolution. You've got policies in place. Your open forum is literally a stop, look, and listen, as are almost all school boards' open forums. It's where you sit and listen to people. You do not take action because they're not agenda items, but you listen. You may ask that an item because it's important enough to you, be placed on a future agenda so that you can have in-depth discussion and make decisions, and that's certainly within your discretion. You also hear ultimately decisions related to non-renewals and terminations, the ultimate decisions. You also can direct complainants to the superintendent or other appropriate administrators according to your policies. You also may handle some student discipline appeals, although there's not a whole lot of things that actually get all the way up to the board. One of the things your policy makes pretty clear, and I want to, as a lawyer, just advise you on, number one, it is not your responsibility to investigate these things. That will only cause problems for you. It's also very difficult for you to get in the middle of something and start demanding answers from staff because you don't know both sides of the story yet, when you've only heard one side of a story. And so it's better to let those processes happen. The reality is the vast majority of conflicts are resolved at the local level and will never get up to you. The vast majority of problems can be resolved at level 1 and 2 very easily. And so it is better to let those processes happen. What you really don't want to do is try to fix things yourself, because you don't, number one, have any authority, but number two, you don't know what's going on that campus specifically, and it's very difficult for you to get in the middle of things where you don't have that education background, that management background to and the atmosphere of the campus, what's going on, all of the factors that, for instance, a principal would have to take into consideration when he or she is making a decision. So you want to make sure that you're not trying to get in there yourself or telling staff how to fix something. That really is the principal's prerogative to try to do that first, and then whoever is level 2 to try to do that second. You also cannot, of course, promise people specific outcomes because you can't control that. You don't know what those things are going to be. You do have rules of order that are designed to contribute to the effective operation of your school board. They do require you to dress and act professionally, just in case you had any questions about that. They're written in there. And to treat everyone respectfully. They also state that you will only deliberate on agenda items and that you will notify the board president if you think you're getting off topic. And as I understand it, that resulted from some litigation that occurred a long time ago. That's now in your local policy, that if you feel, now we're getting off topic, we're not really sticking to what the Open Meetings Act would require, which is we discuss an agenda item, that you just notify the board president for the board president to then determine, are we truly getting off topic? And that really is the best way to handle that, is let the board president ultimately make those calls. As we've discussed before, your local policy does say that you will ask the board president for recognition before you speak, that you will not dominate conversations, that you'll reserve any off-topic discussions until it's time on the agenda. And if it's not on the agenda and you want to talk about it, you'll wait till it is on the agenda to talk about it. The board president, part of his job is to ensure that the board does hear everyone's comments. But it is very important that you don't have private discussions during board meetings. It is very important that you don't text each other during board meetings because that's public information. And you absolutely do not want to put yourself in that kind of a situation. Your rules of order say that you will not make derogatory remarks about each other, that you will address all disagreements to the board president. That during open forum, you can listen to people and you can ask clarifying questions, but you cannot make decisions. That is in conformance with the Open Meetings Act. My understanding is that this part of your policy resulted from some litigation, that if you have any concerns about whether or not my fellow board members are complying with the Open Meetings Act, that you discuss it with the board member. Or if you're concerned that they're not complying with their governance role, for instance, that you first discuss it with that board member. You first have a one-to-one discussion with that board member. If there is no resolution, then you discuss it with the board president, and then the board president has a discussion with the board member. If the board president is not able to reach a satisfactory conclusion, then the board president would moderate a discussion among all board members related to the issue. If there is still no resolution, then it is possible to place an item on the agenda related to deliberation of duties of a public officer. Your board policy also says that 3 board members can request an agenda item and then have a closed session discussion if the board president does not put it on the agenda. So there's 2 ways for this type of discussion to get to the board to have a general discussion about board member conduct is either for the board president to choose to put it on the agenda or for 3 board members to ask that it be placed on the agenda to discuss it. If there is no resolution, yes, ma'am.
A quick question for you. Going back to the previous slide, so what exactly does that deliberation look like if it comes to the agenda?
So you would have a discussion in closed session where typically your board president would say, look, here's the concerns that have been expressed about a board member conduct, and let's talk about it. Let's see if we can get a resolution so that you are acting within your proper governance role. You would hear from the board member. You would listen to the board member about why he or she is doing something that they feel is appropriate and they feel is within their governance role. And then you would see if you could work it out in closed session. If you could not work it out in closed session, then you would come out and have a vote.
Thank you.
Okay? So as we discussed previously, according to your policies, there are not a whole lot of options. You absolutely can go back and look at your board operating procedures and add additional options, but currently your board operating procedures say that if there's no resolution, then the board can vote to require a trustee to have more training, to remove a trustee from board-appointed office, or to do a formal public reprimand. The whole goal is to remediate conduct as opposed to punish people, is to make sure that everyone is acting within their proper governance roles, to help identify appropriate alternatives so that everyone really is operating within their governance mode, and obviously referring to policies and procedures. Now, your policies, your local policies, can be changed. They still have to be changed in accordance with law. But I do think that as a result of some of these discussions, you may see some proposed policy changes. For the superintendent, what you never want to do is put the superintendent in the position of trying to navigate his way through any of these internal board discussions. Okay, that is not his role. It is the board's role to deal with your own internal governance issues. The superintendent, however, can report concerns to the board president. It is also important that board members take their concerns about board member conduct to the board president and not to the superintendent, so that it truly is the board who is negotiating through those issues, not your superintendent. That is not his job and should not be his responsibility, and you don't want to put him in that kind of a position. All right, so let's try another scenario. Billy Bob calls every employee on his or her birthday, which makes him very popular. He then calls on those employees to use the campus copy machines to print his election campaign materials for him and leave them around campus. Okay? So what do you think? Cross the line? Yes, sir, cross the line. Number 1, no trustee can use any district resources or any district employees for election purposes when they're on the clock. Absolutely cannot use resources, money, equipment, any district resources or any district people while they're on the clock. Now, can they choose to volunteer on a Saturday to go put flyers at people's homes? Sure, they can absolutely choose to do that. But while they're on the clock, while they are employed, it's an absolute prohibition under the election code for anyone who is campaigning to use district facilities, district resources for that campaign. If you become aware of something like that, you would notify the board president so the board president could address it. If you come to learn that employees are sneaking around and making copies of election materials, for instance, then you'd notify the superintendent, because that's an employee issue and that's something the superintendent would deal with.
Can we still call them on their birthdays? Or
You can still call them on their birthdays, absolutely.
Right. Awesome, okay.
No problem at all, just don't ask them to copy your materials. That's a lot of employees to call, so I admire you if you actually do that. Management role here is to report that behavior to the board president so the board president can deal with it. If there are allegations of employee misconduct, then your management will be dealing with those. And ultimately, we've often seen, for instance, there's been communications that gone out to employees about, for instance, we got a bond issue coming. Let's talk about what you can and cannot do, what district resources you can and cannot use, those kinds of things. Because people are very, very passionate about candidates and about issues. And so you do want to make sure that they don't inappropriately use resources. Yes, sir.
So these slides that you're going over this is a summary of our board operating procedures as well as the Texas Education
Yes, sir.
Code?
Yes.
They are consistent?
Texas Election Code, your local policies, and your board operating procedures. I kind of put them all together.
When were our board operating procedures last updated?
June 22nd, 2017. They're in tab 4 of your booklet.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I do think after this is a great time for you to go back and start looking at those again, because I do foresee you're going to want to make some changes in them.
Okay, so your recommendation is we should update the
Yes,
board
sir.
operating
Yes,
procedures?
sir. My recommendation is that you do spend some time looking at those. And I've talked with Ms. Soto about maybe even having the opportunity to suggest some things along with that process. But I do think you've come up with some good ideas, and I do think that there's an opportunity for you to streamline some things, make some things more efficient, make sure you stay in your governance roles, and update some things in your board operating procedures. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to talk about prohibited board member conduct and restrictions. And these come out of, again, the same things. Texas law, and then board policy and your board operating procedures. Number one is you cannot violate your fiduciary duty, and that really is your number one duty to the district. Is now, as a trustee, you do have a fiduciary duty to the district. You cannot use any district employees' resources, property to improve non-district property unless it benefits real property in the district. So the important thing is that any district property that is used, any district resources that are used ultimately benefit the district and no one else. There is the possibility that you could decide to have a facility outside of your school district boundaries, okay? And because of that, this is written that way so that you could still do that, but you could only do it if it's going to benefit the district, if it's going to benefit the real property of the district. There is a law that says you can't build a hotel. Just flat, you can't build a hotel. Not real sure what the impetus for that law was. I know that a number of colleges have done so. I can't tell you why it's in the law, but it is in the law. You cannot electioneer with state or local funds for or against any candidate, any measure, or any political party. This becomes very important when you do bond issues. And I've done lots of training with board members, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to make sure that your communications are separated, that your personal communications spent with your own money on your own time are very separate from using district resources, but that is very, very important. One of your board prohibitions is you cannot usurp the superintendent's authority, which is, we're going to talk about the superintendent's responsibilities next. Okay. Board member Phil works for a nonprofit that previously donated large sums of money to the district. He calls the athletic director telling him that if Phil's son does not get a college scholarship, a full ride, the district will not receive any more donations. Have a problem with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Number one, yes, not that it's all kinds of violations of criminal law, I will tell you that. But number two, immediately notify the board president, because that's something that clearly must be. And I will say that employees should be empowered to let the superintendent know when those kinds of things happen, so that the superintendent can report concerns to the board president. Because it can be very intimidating for an employee to get a phone call from a board member. And you think of yourself as a regular human being. Employees think of you as a board member, as a trustee. That that is very important to them, and they think of you as a better human being than everybody else and a more powerful human being. And so when you step out of your role when you step out of that role, they are intimidated. They're very often intimidated. I had a huge issue with one school district where a trustee went around a Mexican restaurant and shook hands with everybody who was at a party from a campus. And it created a big stir because he was just asking them questions about, what's going on campus, and they thought, oh my gosh, he's investigating the campus. They look at you differently, and I know you don't view yourself any differently, but truly they do look at you differently. So you do want to be really careful about the influence that you do have on people. There are also conflict of interest statutes, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but if you do have a substantial interest in a business entity that is doing business with the district, then you do have some very specific responsibilities to notify the district, to abstain from voting, those kinds of things. So if you have what's called a substantial interest. The problem with the law is there are a number of conflict of interest statutes right now, and there's no rhyme or reason between them. So you have to follow all of them. The first one is this one, and it's if you own 10% of stock or shares, or 10% or at least a $15,000 ownership, or if the funds you receive from that business entity exceed 10% of your gross income, then you have a substantial interest in that business entity. So it is important that you then have a separate vote on that, so that you would not be voting on anything related to which you have a substantial interest, except that you can vote on the overall budget. You can't act as a surety for any vendor, and it is a Class A misdemeanor if you violate this law. Your board services already has a form for you, so you just contact them, let them know, and they will give you the form. It does require that when these come up on an agenda that you leave the room during the discussions and the vote, so that it is very, very clear that you have not had any influence. That form that you fill out is then published on the website, and if you've ever looked at your own bios, I don't know that any of you have done that, but if you have looked at your own bios, there is a spot on your bio page that says your conflict of interest forms, and they will be attached there. There is also a requirement for ethics disclosures. Those are for employment or business relationships with vendors that's either yourself or a family member, when the taxable income is more than $2,500 in a year, or over $100 in gifts, or if you have a family relationship with a vendor.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes people throw the word conflict of interest out loosely, but it is a term of art. And even in your description previously, you have to have a certain amount of proceeds. Or could you repeat that?
Yeah,
because
so
I think that's important, because the term gets thrown around a lot. But I think there's a very specific statute that,
Yeah.
there it is, right there.
Yes, and there are a number of statutes, and there are a number of definitions of conflict of interest, and that's part of the problem for you. They're all in one policy, luckily, so you can just kind of go one after the other through the policy. But substantial interest for the first statute is 10% of the stock of the company or shares, at least 10% or at least $15,000 ownership, or the funds received exceed 10% of your gross income. That's the first of the conflict of interest statutes. And you are absolutely right. Conflict of interest has very defined terms, definitions, and they're different in each statute.
For example, now, if someone of a board member is employed by a certain company, is there an application to those requirements or not?
Yes, sir. If their employment with that company exceeds 10% of their gross income, then they must file the affidavit. Yes, sir. Okay, so the second one is the ethics disclosure, which is a little bit different, and it is if you have taxable income over $2,500 in a year, over $100 in gifts, or if you have a family relationship. It does not include political contributions or food that you receive when you are a guest of someone. That one is a form that goes to the Texas Ethics Commission. And it is also, you would also provide it to board services. You are required by law to file this within 7 days of when you realize there is a conflict. What you do, and it's very good practice, is anytime you go out for RFPs, anything else, you require your vendors to submit a Form CIS so that they self-declare if they have a relationship with any board member, which then may trigger a board member's knowledge. Oh, okay, I didn't realize they were even applying to be a vendor of the district. So that you kind of have a cross-check that way. They also must do it according to law when they have a conflict. You require it for everyone. And I think that's a good idea, just so that you do have that trigger and you have that notice. Failure to file is it can be a Class A misdemeanor, it can be a Class C misdemeanor. It just depends on the amount of that's involved in the contract, the number of times you've done it, those kinds of things, and the contract is void. So you do want to get it right. Your board policy BBFA, which is your local, says that on those also the board member will leave the room for the discussion and the vote, and will file that Form CIS with board services. That Form CIS will also be posted on the district website, so that there is, board services has everything, and there is disclosure to the public. You also have another statute when you have an interest in real property, because school districts buy a lot of real property, you buy a lot of land, and very often a board member could be part owner in land. So you want to make sure that if you are, that you are giving notice. You have to file that with the county clerk, where you live and where the land is located, both. So the land may be somewhere else, and you want to make sure that you filed it with both. You also file that affidavit with board services, and again, that form will be posted on the district's website, so that all of these conflicts disclosure forms are treated exactly the same way in the district. They all go to board services, and they all get posted by your bio on the website. The district also does an annual financial management report that lists all the expenditures that are paid on behalf of trustees, any reimbursements to trustees, any gifts over $250, and how much money has been received for those business transactions. There's also campaign finance reports, as you know, that you must file, and you've got to do those every 6 months. Your local board policy addresses your service on other nonprofit boards. And sometimes those nonprofit boards can have what is perceived as a conflict. May not be a legal conflict under those statutes, but could be perceived as a conflict. For instance, Bobby, or Billy Joe, whatever I called him, who is on a nonprofit that gives a lot of money to the district, and therefore he wants a favor for his son. Your local policy says that you are encouraged to participate in nonprofit work with other nonprofit boards and serve on those boards as long as it doesn't interfere with your role as a trustee, and as long as you don't receive any compensation for your work on any of those other nonprofit boards.
Sorry, one question.
Yes,
Can you sit on a for-profit board?
nonprofit boards.
What about?
Can you serve on a
company's
for-profit board? I don't recall that there is anything in your policies about service on for-profit boards. You certainly, if you're serving on a for-profit board and then it becomes a vendor of the district, then all those conflict of interest policies are going to kick in. But I don't recall anything in your local policy. That may be something you want to address. That's a really good point. I don't recall that is in there. You may want to address that in your local policy. Obviously, for E-rate vendors, all campaign contributions have to be posted. There's also a nepotism statute where you cannot vote to hire or change an employee's status if they are related within the 2nd degree of affinity, which is marriage, or the 3rd degree of consanguinity, which is blood, family. That if you violate it, it is a misdemeanor and it is official misconduct. So that can result in adverse consequences for you. So second degree of affinity is you're married or your spouse is related by blood to another within the first or second degree. Third degree consanguinity is parent-child is first degree, brother, sister, grandparent, grandchild's second degree, and then you get down to great-grandchildren, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews is third degree. So you're going pretty far down the line when you talk about consanguinity with what would be considered outside of your immediate family. There is a substitute teacher exception because we're running out of substitute teachers. So now substitute teachers are not considered within that employment. There is also a continuous employment exception, which is 6 months if you are elected and 30 days if you're appointed. So if they're hired prior to you coming on the board, they can stay hired. So if, for instance, if your spouse was hired by the district and 3 months later you come on the board because you were elected to the board, your spouse, either you've got to go or your spouse has to go. You can't do that. So you've got to be able to follow the continuous employment. There is an exception for bus drivers in small districts, but that doesn't cover you. There's abuse of official capacity, which means you misapplied anything of value, anything at all of value of the district, and you gained a benefit or you harmed someone by violating a law related to the trustee. Exceptions are frequent flyer miles. The Attorney General, the legislature has determined we're just not going to get in the middle of whether or not frequent flyer miles are a benefit. If you get frequent flyer miles, more power to you. We're not going to look at that. That's just too complicated and too messy. Other travel awards, travel discounts, food coupons, those kinds of things don't count, but everything else does. And again, it can go from a Class C misdemeanor for a small violation all the way up to a first-degree felony if a lot of money is involved. So it is pretty serious. There's also official oppression. Official oppression is when you, acting as a trustee, deny or impede another in exercising any of their rights, privileges, powers, or immunities, and your conduct is unlawful. And, that's why we've been talking about all those things, is to keep you within your proper governance role so that you don't get into these kinds of problems. It can be unlawful search and seizure, sexual harassment, all different kinds of activities where you're impeding the rights or privileges or the power of another. That too is up from a small Class A misdemeanor all the way up to a third-degree felony.
Question for you. Going back to, and I'm just taking a quick look of, it's slide, I just had my hand on it. Expenditures, 198. Expenditures paid on behalf of trustees. So if you're invited to a conference, but you're invited in your role as you're not acting as a trustee, you're invited as your, you're there in your capacity as your single person, not representative of DISD, but, I'm trustee Garcia and stuff. Is that what counts into these financial management reports?
No, these are expenditures the district has paid on behalf of you. So if the district sends you to a conference, that's going to show up in a financial report. But if you, in your other job, work in another school district, for instance, and that school district sends you to a conference for your role as an employee of that school district, it would not be on Dallas ISD's financial report. It's just Dallas ISD funds that are expended on behalf of trustees serving in their official capacity.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you. That's perfect.
You bet. Bribery. Okay. Probably know this, but it is illegal to solicit, accept, or agree to accept any benefit in exchange for a vote. You can't do that. Or for you to violate any of your board duties, even if it doesn't come to a vote, or for you to accept a political contribution with the understanding that you're going to take specific action on something. And you would not have made that vote if it wasn't for that donation. So that one is a little more difficult, because when you're out there campaigning, you are telling people your opinion about things. You're telling them the things that you want to accomplish as a trustee. So if someone then gives you a political contribution because they like what they heard you say, that's okay. Look at the other side of that. If you're out there telling people what you believe and how you want to operate as a trustee, and someone comes to you and says, you know, I don't really like that. If you vote this way, here's a $100,000 contribution. That's when it's illegal, okay? When you would be doing something different than you otherwise would be doing, and that takes you straight to a second-degree felony. So it is very serious. Illegal gifts to public servants are for those who exercise discretion in contracts, and there is a benefit exchanged with someone who is interested in a contract. So, for instance, if there's an RFP for legal services and I include a $10,000 check in that RFP, and someone cashes that check and encourages a vote for my law firm, then that would be illegal. That would be an illegal gift to a public servant. And I didn't do that, by the way, just so you know. Definition of a benefit there is very, very broad, and it's anything that's reasonably regarded as a gain or advantage, including any benefit to any person in whose welfare you have a direct or substantial interest. So if someone said to you, I could get your child a free ride to college, or I could get your child into a college, or I could get your child a spot on this soccer team in exchange for your vote, or in exchange for this money that I'm giving you, then that is illegal. So it not just what you do, but the benefit that would come to people who depend on you. There are some exceptions, obviously. If there are fees required, then your folks must pay those fees, and vendors must pay certain fees. Any gifts due to a personal relationship, if you've had a long-time personal relationship and you exchange birthday gifts or Christmas gifts, that does not violate the law. Anything that is reportable to the state for unreimbursed expenses and political contributions are not included in the definition of benefit under that statute. Use of a facility under that statute would not be a benefit. Anything under $50 except for cash or negotiable instruments. And negotiable instruments includes gift cards. So anything that's convertible to cash, essentially. Food, lodging, transportation, and entertainment as a guest, again, is not a benefit under that statute. There's also statute regarding illegal honorariums, that you cannot accept an honorarium for services that would not be requested to be provided if you were not a trustee. Now, that there is a specific exclusion for the thing that you most would think of. As a trustee, I've been asked to give a speech, I've been asked to make a presentation, I've been asked to do something, and they're going to pay my way. They're going to pay for my transportation and my lodging so that I can go be a presenter. That is excluded. That is not considered an illegal honorarium under the statute.
Sorry, let me ask a question on that real quick. But
Sure.
if you don't have to, if it's here in Dallas and I don't need transportation, lodging, or a meal, then you cannot accept.
If you're, okay, could you accept, say,
So you're saying
$500 to
or
give
25?
a speech?
Is that it's 51?
No, you can't accept money. You cannot accept money to give a speech. They can only reimburse you for your transportation, lodging, et cetera. Okay. Misuse of official information, and this is where it gets difficult for you under the Public Information Act and under this statute, because you come in contact with a great deal of information in your role as a trustee. You come in contact with a great deal of information. Some of it is highly confidential. Some of it could give an advantage to a vendor if you were to let that information out. And so it is real critical that you think about that as you're sharing information about the district. So it is illegal when, in reliance on information that you've received as a trustee that is not public information, you acquire or help acquire property, transactions, or an enterprise that's affected by that information. essentially to make a profit on something. It's like insider trading. You cannot do insider trading, okay? You can't speculate or help another speculate on the basis of that information or coerce someone into failing to notify law enforcement. So it's the public servant version of insider trading. You cannot do. You cannot use confidential information gained by being a board member for any non-governmental purpose, essentially, with intent to obtain a benefit or to harm somebody else. There's also anti-discrimination laws. We cannot, by statute, discriminate on the basis of race, religion, color, sex, or national origin. It is a misdemeanor, and there is injunction and attorney's fees. Your board policies are more expansive than that. You have a local policy that expands the protected categories far beyond the ones that are in the law, and we've already talked about those. There is also federal criminal liability. Everything I've talked to you before is state criminal liability. This is federal, and you cannot seek or accept a benefit in return for influencing an official act, committing or aiding in committing fraud on the United States, or acting in violation of an official duty. This comes in with anything that is paid for with federal funds, and you get a lot of federal funds in this district. So it is very critical that that you not do that, that you refrain from that. Under federal programs, it's also illegal to steal, embezzle, fraudulently obtain $5,000 or more that's under the care of the district, or accept a benefit in excess of $5,000 in connection with a business or transaction. It does not include salaries when people are employed, but it does include everything else. There's also a lot of federal civil rights liability. I think we went over some of this earlier, but Section 1983 involves deprivations of constitutional rights. And we talked about the Constitution our first time together. And then Title IX is sex discrimination, sexual harassment, and gender equity issues. Title VI is race, color, national origin discrimination. We've got the Age Discrimination in Education Act. The Age Discrimination in Education Act says you cannot discriminate in the provision of an education to someone based on age, beyond what would be considered compulsory attendance. So for instance, if you have an elementary school student who has already aced everything in elementary school and really should be in high school and receiving high school classes, it is illegal for you not to offer that student high school classes. You cannot make that decision just because of the student's age. You have to do it because of the student's abilities. Okay? There's also the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and that one relates to employment. Anyone over 40 is protected. Title VI is race, color, religion, sex, or national origin discrimination. Family Medical Leave Act, we cannot discriminate against our employees who have a right to annually 12 weeks of medical leave. We have board policies that are very specific on that. We cannot discriminate against our employees because of their disabilities, and we cannot discriminate against students because of theirs. We have two statutes that address our responsibilities to our students who have disabilities. One is IDEA, when they have very specific disabilities that are covered by IDEA, and one is Section 504, which is much more general, related to student disability information. There's also GINA, the Genetic Discrimination Act. We cannot discriminate against someone because of their genetic markers, for instance. Certain individuals have cancer markers, those kinds of things. We cannot discriminate against someone because of that genetic information. And then, of course, the Constitution issues, and then student records. There is no monetary liability, except that you can lose your federal funds if you do not comply with the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. The institution could lose their federal funds. So it's a serious consequence when it happens. It doesn't happen very often. Mostly we see folks come into compliance with the student records. All right. Board member Sue does her own Google and criminal record searches on every potential employee the superintendent recommends.
Sorry, quick question back
Yes.
to the FERPA requirement. So if we contract with someone and within that agreement we have covenants around FERPA, but that contractor they violate FERPA, how does that impact the district? So district contracts with Ozarka, there's FERPA requirements between us and Ozarka violates FERPA.
Then the district's responsibility is to correct that defect if you can get them to stop violating FERPA or to terminate the contract.
Do you lose federal funds based on Ozarka's actions?
Oh, you could if you ignored the issue. That's the only time you would lose federal funds is if you ignore the issue and don't correct it when the U.S. Department of Education comes to you about it. Then yes, but otherwise, no. The U.S. Department of Education is very interested in you correcting those kinds of defects rather than punishing you by withdrawing all federal funds. Okay? And that is what typically happens. I'm going to skip the next scenario because your superintendent does your hiring, so we really don't need to go there. I know that you are in the evaluation process for your superintendent now, so we're not going to take a lot of time on this, but it is important to talk about what his authority is. Because what his authority is what your authority is not. Okay? So he is the educational leader and the chief executive officer of the district. He is responsible for planning, operation, supervision, evaluation of all educational programs, services, and facilities. He is responsible for assigning all staff in your district. He's also responsible for hiring staff. He is responsible for ensuring that there is an evaluation system for your staff and that administrators are evaluated. Your principal must evaluate campus employees and then provide that information up to central administration. Your superintendent is also the one who initiates employment terminations, suspensions, or non-renewals of contract employees. That recommendation comes from your superintendent. He also manages day-to-day operations, including plans, procedures, programs, and systems. He proposes a budget for you. He administers that budget. Has lots of good people who help him do that, but ultimately it is his responsibility. He does recommend board policies to you. You ultimately adopt your local policies and exhibits. As you know, TASB now is saying don't adopt legals because they're the law. He also must implement those policies after you have adopted them, and he can develop administrative regulations to implement those policies. He's also responsible for leading all student performance initiatives. You set the goals of what you want him to accomplish, and then you let him go. And he leads those student performance initiatives. He organizes central administration in the way that works for him, and he consults with district level committees. He is responsible for ensuring that you adopt a student code of conduct, because ultimately you do that adoption, but it's his responsibility to bring that to you. He's also responsible for notifying staff regarding arrested and expelled students and has a process for making sure that that occurs. Your responsibility is to notify juvenile court when students are expelled or placed in DAP. You delegated that to the superintendent, so the superintendent has a process in place where campus administrators do that. It's also his responsibility to follow laws and regulations just like everyone else and perform the duties you assign him, to submit required reports, and to provide joint leadership with you. Your local policy is pretty extensive on the superintendent duties to provide leadership and direction for the education system based on student needs, standards of excellence, and equity and district goals. So he truly is the leader and provides the direction for the district. Scenario, parent asks, why can Greengrass ISD buy all of their students a laptop, but we can't even keep working computers in our classrooms? So when you're looking at superintendent management responsibilities versus your governance responsibilities, you can have a conversation with a constituent about the budget and how much money you've put in the budget for every student to have a laptop, for instance, or a iPad. You can certainly have those conversations because ultimately you make budget decisions, but your superintendent is the one who's going to bring you the budget. You can look at your technology strategic plan. You can decide if you want the board to alter that plan, and you can decide if you want the board to have a budget for those kinds of things. But ultimately, your superintendent is the one who is going to review the technology plan and budget with the board, is going to suggest revisions to the board, and is going to communicate with parents regarding those kinds of specifics. There's statutes, and then you've got local policies on collaboration between the superintendent and the board. And it requires him to be an advocate for high student achievement, to create and support community connections, to provide educational leadership, including a long-term plan for your employees, to establish goals tied to that long-term plan, to support professional development, and for you all together to periodically evaluate that board superintendent leadership, governance, and teamwork to see if you think it is working as you collaborate on these issues. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the superintendent evaluation except to say that it really is designed to ensure that you are meeting your goals, to ensure that there are exemplary standards and that he is efficiently managing the district to improve student achievement. There are a number of processes, and I know that you have yours in place. What is required is that it must occur annually, and it must be in writing at least once annually. You can have conversations with your superintendent anytime. You could have a monthly conversation with your superintendent about evaluation issues. I'm sure he would love that. But once a year, it must be in writing. That evaluation is very confidential by law. It cannot be disclosed to anyone. The contents of it cannot be disclosed. So you can't go out there and talk about what's in the superintendent's evaluation. You must base that evaluation on his duties, on his contract, and any other criteria and goals that you have set for him. The way the process typically would work is you, the board, would come up with a way to evaluate the superintendent, come up with a unified document if you can, and then have that discussion with the superintendent in closed session. Then you would come out in open session to approve the evaluation of the superintendent, but the document that you're approving is still confidential by law, even though you've approved it in open session. Yes, sir.
Okay, I may need to have a little more detail on that, because the evaluation instrument that we've used in the past several years has a lot of objective measurements, fund balance, student achievement goals, and so forth. Those are all objective, and they're based on publicly available data, and the superintendent gets certain points for meeting certain of these categories.
Okay.
And then there's a portion of the evaluation instrument that includes the comments and the ratings by the trustees of the superintendent.
Okay.
Now, as I recall, we've always released that first part, which has all of the objective measurements, the targets, and so forth.
You've released that information. The only way you can by law release that information is with the consent of the superintendent.
Well, we have his consent.
Okay, if you have his consent, then you can release it. That's not a problem. But you could not do that on your own without his consent.
Okay.
Okay?
Thanks.
You bet. Send it out there. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and so your process is exactly as you described. You first set goals, and then put those down, and ultimately, you may have some formative conferences over the course of the year to discuss it, and ultimately have a summative conference. I'm not going to go into all the domains in the process because you have one in place. You do have a local policy that says you're going to declare the core beliefs with advice from the superintendent to achieve his mission and the district's mission and vision, and then you're going to give them the latitude to get it done. And it is, your local policy is really specific about that you set the goal and then you let him go. And It's up to him to get it done. It's your job to communicate those expected outcomes. It's his job to achieve those outcomes. And those roles are very, very different. All right, Betty emails the superintendent with the name of her brother, who she says would be the perfect athletic director for the district. When the superintendent makes his recommendation, who is not her brother, she's a board member and she votes against it. And she encourages her board members to do the same because clearly the superintendent cannot pick the best candidate. I do bring this one up because, not because it's going to apply to you because your superintendent does hire folks, but because it does bring up one point that is really critical, and that's second guessing the superintendent. And it is very easy to do that. It's very easy to second guess the superintendent, but the reality is he's in charge and it's his responsibility. And if that situation, the person he hires, doesn't work out, it's his responsibility to fix it. And where you get in trouble is when you start second guessing that and you think there's a better person or a better way or a better process or a better color to paint something or anything. When you start second guessing the superintendent, then that's where you get in trouble and you get outside your governance role. So you set the goals and then you set him free to achieve those goals. I don't know if they've given you any on what they want their football teams to do, but I actually have had boards who have done that to superintendents, which I always found rather odd. So let's talk about what the board does with relation to personnel matters next. The superintendent is the one who makes recommendations, and then the board approves or rejects those recommendations. The superintendent, if you reject something, then the superintendent makes alternate recommendations. You have delegated your hiring to the superintendent. I will tell you that's not in board policy. That is only in the superintendent's contract, which makes it a little difficult for the public or this lawyer to find it. It took me a little more work than I thought. So you may want to think about if that is something you want all superintendents to have the authority to do in Dallas ISD, you may want to think about changing your local policy so that you do delegate that authority to the superintendent in local policy. You must by law give notice of vacancies. And I do want to talk just a second about that because the way that works is not every vacancy. The superintendent has the sole authority to move people around. Okay, and he can move everybody to where he thinks they would be appropriate. At the end of the day, there's going to be one or more vacancies after he's moved folks around if someone has resigned. That's the vacancy that must be posted, okay? Not all the others. He has the authority to move anybody else into any position. It's just that last position that's vacant. That's where the superintendent then would ensure that that position is posted. So people typically think as soon as there's a vacancy, there's going to be a posting for that job. And that's just not the case because of the superintendent's authority to reassign. There are a number of different types of contracts, and it is important that we respect the differences in those types of contracts, whether it's a superintendent contract that can be up to 5 years, probationary or term contracts you have within the district, and then you have a wealth of at-will employees who do not have contracts. I'm not going to go into all of that on contracts because I think y'all know all of this pretty well. When we are terminating any contract in the middle of a school year, that is a very high standard. It is good cause. Failure to meet the conduct standards is applied in similarly situated school districts. It is a very high standard. So it must be something that is either non-remediable, the person really can't be here anymore, it's dangerous, it's very outrageous and egregious conduct. That's when you would terminate in the middle of a contract. So if someone is harming a child, for instance, is stealing money, is doing those kinds of things, that would warrant a mid-contract termination.
What about a policy violation?
It depends on how serious the policy violation is. If it's a serious policy violation, such as, say, someone was contacting vendors and telling them how to apply during the no contact period, telling them how to submit their RFPs so that they would get selected. I think that would be serious enough that you would say that is satisfactory to terminate. mid-contract. There are others that, you know, you've got policies that say you must follow all laws and rules. And if someone made a minor policy violation, didn't realize it, and improved that conduct, then you may not want to, then you would not want to terminate. It really does have to be things that are pretty outrageous, dangerous, non-remediable.
And how does that contrast with non-renewal?
Okay? Non-renewal is board policy reasons, and only board policy reasons. So board policy, you have a list of reasons, and you have a very extensive list of reasons. I don't believe that I put them no, I didn't put them in here. It's a very extensive list in your board policy DFBB of things that can happen. And it's a lot of, you know, documented evidence of failure to improve your job performance. It is some minor activities that because they became your activities, that because they became known, reduce your effectiveness in the district. You've got an extensive list, a multi-page, and we actually, I think, have it in here. So it's DFBB, and it is, the reality is that a lot of things can be covered by that. It is a lower standard. It is a much lower standard to, a DFBB is in here. It's a much lower standard to non-renew than to terminate in the middle of a school year. When you've got a contract, no one has a contract right to a contract beyond the term of the contract. So then it's just non-renewal reasons, and in your extensive non-renewal reasons. Everybody has a contract right to the full year of a contract. So if you're going to get rid of someone in the middle of a school year, it's got to be an outrageous, egregious, dangerous kind of a situation for you to terminate in the middle of a contract. Okay. Now, you as a board are the ones who set up those local policy non-renewal reasons. So if you want additional reasons, or you want to eliminate some of those reasons, that is within your discretion to do so. It is the board in your local policy DFBB that have set those non-renewal reasons. Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Great, okay, excellent. Okay, your district uses independent hearing examiners to hear those cases, and then ultimately you will hear oral argument and make the ultimate decisions on the non-renewals. So you will have a recommendation from a hearing examiner in front of you. Hearing examiners are not allowed to work for school districts or for employees. So they tend to be people who are not as familiar with the inner workings of a public school district. So that becomes our job when we are arguing, or when we are presenting non-renewal and termination cases, to make it real clear why it's important that those things occur. So we hear a lot about due process, you know, and you hear people say, well, that's not due process. According to the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution, you cannot deprive someone of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's what the law says, okay? We don't deprive people of life here, although I'm sure a principal or two has threatened that, but we don't deprive people of life. We do deprive people of property. They have a property right to a contract, and we may choose to terminate that contract because it is important that we do so for the good of the school district. So what due process then requires of us, and the term due process is notice and a hearing. It's those two things under the law. Giving notice to the employee of what the employee did wrong, and then giving an employee an impartial hearing on that issue. Those are the two things that are required, is notice and a hearing. Especially for employment issues, the person has the right to legal counsel, has the right to the impartial decision maker, which you use independent hearing examiners, has the right to cross-examine witnesses, to present evidence and witnesses, and to review all evidence. So it is a trial. If you think about all due process, this is kind of a middle of the road due process. Obviously, if we are going to deprive someone, If a state is going to deprive someone of life, then there are a multitude of other kinds of processes that are included. If we are going to kick, on the other side of it, if we're going to kick a student out of school for one day, we still give due process, but it's very minimal due process. I'm going to tell you what you did wrong, and then I'm going to tell you you're going home for a day. Okay, I'm going to listen to your side of the story, and then I'm going to tell you that you're going home for a day. So it's very minimal. So due process is a very flexible standard depending on what we are going to deprive someone of. Yours, when you're talking about contracts, is kind of a middle of the road one that gives sufficient protections to an employee to ensure that the employee has the ability to make sure that they've given you their side of the story before you terminate or non-renew a contract. Appeals can go to the Commissioner of Education also, but we don't need to, and then ultimately to court. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that. Your legal department is very good at sitting down and looking at all the non-renewal and termination cases that are initiated to ensure that there are no laws being violated. That is part of their review, is to ensure that we're not terminating someone because they exercised a free speech right, or because they were sexually harassed and we don't want them to talk, so we're going to terminate them. They have a disability and we failed to accommodate it. Those kinds of things. That is the responsibility of your legal department, and they do a great job in that review of those. Your duties as to personnel are, number one, confidentiality. You become aware of a great deal of information related to personnel. It is your duty to keep that information confidential because you owe a fiduciary duty to the district. Very often, you also are that ultimate decision maker. You're the ultimate objective decision maker. And so you may receive a packet of information on a non-renewal, and it's your responsibility to review that packet and then listen to oral argument from both sides and ultimately make a decision. Your other responsibilities are to recognize that an employee has a right to talk to the board. You do talk to employees, and there is a statute that says employees have the right to talk to board members. What you don't have the right to do is promise them an outcome. You don't have the right to promise them that you're going to take some certain action that will satisfy them. But you absolutely want to make sure that employees can talk to you if they choose to talk to you. You can direct the employee to the appropriate liaison or to the grievance process, and the superintendent can tell you how those kinds of issues are being addressed. You can also get updates on problem employees. As the superintendent shares information with you, he can also give you updates. And then, of course, you're involved in grievances, non-renewals, and terminations. I think we're going to skip that one because we've done that, and we've really talked about grievances. I don't know that we really need to do any more on grievances. Pam, what do you think? Because we ended up with a scenario that really discussed it in pretty much detail. So I'd kind of like to just skip over grievances. We got to the important things. Yes, sir.
Ask a question.
Sure.
So what you're saying here in this scenario, just to make sure I'm clear, is that, like, board members can't be like aiding and abetting, grievance, and they can't be, getting them data and information and, encouraging them and, working with them to tell them what to do against the district.
Yes, sir, you're exactly right.
Okay,
Board members cannot be involved in grievances at the lower levels.
Because if not, there's a conflict and they have to recuse themselves.
They must recuse
So if
themselves.
they get involved in any kind of grievance or in any kind of current or former employee complaint against the district, then there's a clear conflict and they can't participate in, the level, whatever we are.
Yes, sir.
3 or-
Then they're violating their governance responsibilities. That's exactly right. And violating a fiduciary duty to the district. So.
And violating their fiduciary duty to the district.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the way I set this scenario up is kind of twofold. Number one, that the board member is active at levels 1 and 2. And then the board member comes at level 3 when it's in front of the board and gets involved. so that we could talk about both issues. So we could talk about, it really is not appropriate for a board member ever to be involved in levels 1 and 2. It is your responsibility, your duty is to hear it at level 3. And so you don't want to do anything that compromises your ability to do your job. And once you've gotten involved at level 1 or 2, then you've compromised your ability to do your job at level 3.
That
So
would
you
include
don't ever want to
litigation
do that.
also, right?
I'm sorry?
That would include litigation.
Oh, yes, sir, absolutely would include litigation. And so then if you do it, and sometimes it can be inadvertent, you know? I thought I was having a conversation with a friend about a fictitious employer and found out that this is a grievance that's going up through the school district. So if you do get involved in it, what you want to do at level 3 is get yourself out of it and not have a conversation at the board level about it at all. You want to, my advice is you do what your board operating procedures say and you don't even be in the room. Rather than, let me help you ask the right questions in front of the board. You just don't even be in the room. You walk out. Okay, so that you're not accused of anything.
So may I ask a question then? So if we know that a board member has violated this, then we need to say, hey, board member, you can't be in here. You've been aiding and abetting a litigant against the district.
Yes, sir. I think that's exactly the conversation that you would have is according to your board operating procedures, the way you would do that is you'd have a private conversation with that board member. If that doesn't resolve it, then you get the board president involved. If that doesn't resolve it, then the whole board has that discussion with the individual board member.
But what happens
That's-
if like that person like shows up and wants to do their stop, look, and listen in front of us, and there's one board member that clearly has been aiding and abetting that stop, look, and listen? How can we have the private discussion in this, because it's now like a public session?
You could go into closed session.
Okay.
You could just stop it, go into closed session, have a discussion about what's going on, and see if you can get it resolved. If you can't get it resolved, then you're kind of stuck that night, at least, because you have to have agenda notice in order to take any action against a board member. So if you can't resolve it individually, you can't resolve it through the board president, you can't resolve it with the 9 of you having the conversation about it, you don't have time to put it on the agenda to do anything to that board member at that time.
But what if
So-
we know, theoretically, what if we know ahead of time that this has been going on and then this person is going to come?
Then I think you try to stop it. I think you have a conversation with the board member. If it doesn't work, you get your board president involved. If your board president is not able to get the appropriate resolution to it, then you may put it on the agenda. It's kind of escalating consequences. But it is important, I think, to address those issues so that you don't have someone who is doing something that could be harmful to the district. Because ultimately, number one, bottom line for you is you owe a fiduciary duty to the district. And that's what you must keep in mind as you do anything in the district, is you cannot violate that fiduciary duty. And, getting involved in an individual situation where you don't know all the facts, that could very easily violate your fiduciary duty.
Ms. Ross, sorry to interrupt you. So we want to aim to stop at 8 in about 5 minutes, but I wanted to give trustees an opportunity if they just have any. First, let me back up. Thank you for this. All of this is a reference material. This a lot of this that I need to continue to read through. But I also want to give our trustees, while we had you in person, if they had any specific questions that we hadn't gotten, something we hadn't gotten to, or something we wanted to review.
Sure.
I want to give them some time just to, and there might be not be any, but I want to give folks an opportunity to ask before we
Absolutely.
shut down for the evening. Okay, so we have no questions. So thank you again for this. This is very helpful. I want to thank the trustees for, this is the third one we've had for hours. I think it's an important topic. I'm glad we had it. Especially want to thank the veteran trustees, Trustee Foreman left, Trustee Flores, Mitch K. Marshall. I know you've been on this board for a minute, and a lot of this is a bit second nature to you, but for us folks that are newer to the board, for me, speak for myself, it's been very beneficial. So thank you for being patient with us, veteran trustees, and thank you for taking the time to prepare. So if we don't have any other questions or comments, we'll close out the session and want to say thank you.
Thank you.
It
Appreciate it.
is-
Thank you for the guide as well.
Thank you. Oh, good, good. And we do want that to be useful to you. So as you look at it, if you think we've missed things, please let us know because we'll be happy to revise it to make sure it suits your needs.
Okay, thank
Okay?
you.
Thank you.
7:56, and this meeting is now adjourned.